Well, once again, good morning to everyone if I have not spoken to you as of yet. This morning our lesson is coming out of Exodus, the 31st chapter, starting at verse 12 is where we're coming from. But before we get started, I'm going to do something that Reverend Jackson used to always be fond of. He would say it's always good to have what we call an icebreaker. So we're going to start off with a question. I'm not going to quiz you guys, but I'm going to make it easy for you. Y'all want it easy, right? Helen said, yeah, quick. You want it easy? Yeah, I'll make it easy for you. I have only one question this morning to start things off. And it's an easy question because I'm going to give you the answer first. You know, that's kind of like, that's how Jeopardy does it. They give you the answer, and you just put it into a question. So it should be easy, right? Should be easy, okay? Oh, perhaps this one should be an easy one. Here it is, and it's something you've already heard. Actually, you heard it last week and even in prior weeks. Here's the answer. You are guilty for what it is that you did. You are guilty for what it is you didn't do. What's the question? You are guilty for what it is you did. You are guilty for what it is you didn't do. I got what is mercy? Bingo, that's the answer. They get all a good response, but the answer was, what is sin of commission and omission? To explain that to you once again, it's basically, I guess you could call it a category where they rate sin, if you could rate sin, because we know sin is what? Sin. But they call it a sin of commission and a sin of omission. A sin of commission is when you are guilty for what it is that you did. In other words, what you have committed. That's why they call it commission. In other words, you talk about you're going to vandalize somebody's car, and you do it. You willfully did it. That's a sin. So you are guilty for what it is that you did. Sin of commission, or omission rather, is that you're guilty for what it is you didn't do. This person who said they were going to vandalize his car let you know that I'm going to vandalize it and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right now. You had all opportunity to stop them. You could have stopped them, but you willfully chose not to do anything about it. So you are considered guilty for what it is that you didn't do when you had the opportunity to do something about it. And it doesn't only apply to, let's say, if somebody's doing something, you could stop them. It can only reflect upon you. Somebody could be going through something, having a hardship or a difficult time. You can be that one who can give a comforting word. You can be that one just to put your arm around them. You could be that one just to help lift them up. But you willfully said, I'm not going to do a thing. So you are considered guilty. Now, the big question is, well, somebody would say, well, how is that a sin because I didn't do anything? It is, if you understand the definition of sin. Then here's the next question. What is the definition of sin? That you know that something's wrong. What is the definition of sin? I'll give you the easy one here in a second. I'll give you a couple more seconds. What's a definition that you may have for sin? That's the key one right there. Anything that is displeasing in God's sight is called a sin. So if you are an individual who could, let's say, just help somebody out, but you chose not to, God is not what? Pleased with that. So it's called a sin. So that's what you're looking at when you have the question of what is sin of commission and what is sin of omission. Mm-hmm. When you could have done something about it. Mm-hmm. 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 Is that the right thing to do? I would say, to me, yes, because you put forth that act. Your heart was in the right place to try to get the situation right, rather than say, well, if I tell it to Wallace, he can tell it so-and-so, and it'll get across. But still, you're putting forth an act to rectify the situation. Did I see a hand in the back a second ago? No. Yeah, basically, you put forth that action because you did what you thought you could, rather than just say, well, I'm not getting involved with this. Let it just play out. When you have the power to bring about change, and that was the key to it. Now, with that being an icebreaker, starting off, last week we opened up unit number 3. And as we know, unit number 3 basically is the last 4 lessons that we have for this our fall quarter series of lessons. And the theme that we had for this particular quarter is that of obedience in society. And we speak of obedience in society. I immediately went back, if you remember, to unit 2, to the lesson that dealt with obedience to God in worship alone, or obedience to worshiping God and God alone. And I talked about how in the Ark of the Covenant, there was this thing called the testimony that was put in the Ark of the Covenant. What's known as the testimony we commonly call the 10 Commandments. In our King James translation, they call them the tables of the law. In teaching, they call you the 2 tables of the law. And how this relates to obedience in society, we talked about how the first 4, let's just warm up on that. The first 4 commandments are what? The first one is, see if we get them in order. What's the first one? It's the big one. Commandment. Thou shalt have no other God before me. Otherwise, you only worship God and God alone. That's how the lesson started off. The second one was, thou shalt not bow down to any graven image and worship it. The third one was, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. Then you have the fourth one, which is the lesson we had today, which deal with honoring the Sabbath day. In other words, and to keep it holy. Those first 4 deal with your relationship. Once again, your relationship, I like to term it this way, one-on-one with God. Then you have 6 more that come behind that. The 5th one, I believe is, if I keep the order correctly, is thou shalt honor thy mother and thy father. Father first, honor thy father and thy mother. Thank you for the accuracy of that. You honor your parents, which you're supposed to do. The next one is, thou shalt not kill. Some translations have thou shalt not murder, which we'll talk about that hopefully later. Then you have thou shalt not commit adultery, not idolatry. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Then you have thou shalt not do what? We call them sticky fingers back in the day. Thou shalt not steal. Followed by the 9th one is thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, such as the lesson we dealt with dealing with obedience in justice, telling about lies and so on. And then you have the 10th one, which is thou shalt not covet what thy neighbor has. These last 6 we gave you deal with your one-on-one relationship with who? With each other. But I like to add a little play on words, in society, because our lesson theme is obedience in society. So the last 6 deal with your relationship one-on-one with your fellow man in society. Now today's lesson, as we know, is dealing with the Sabbath day. Some might say, wait a minute, well, that falls in the category of God and being in relationship with him because it's the 4th commandment. True, but it also coincides with how we as a society honor and celebrate what's known as the Sabbath day. So this is what we're dealing with. Now today's lesson is coming out of Exodus, the 31st chapter, starting at verse 12. Exodus is, in its order, what book in the Bible? The second book of a series of 5 books known as what? The law. The Hebrew Bible is called the Torah. All it is the first 5 books of the Bible. And that's what they call it, the Torah. Another thing they use with these laws, they use what's called the Mishnah. The Mishnah is actually a writing of the 613 Levitical laws and expounds upon that. Then they have behind that, they have what's called the Talmud. The Talmud is actually, you could say, a case-by-case breakdown of what the laws are talking about and the debate that went on about them. And then they finish it up with this thing called the Gemara. The Gemara is pretty much a commentary on how they handle certain laws. The reason why I brought these things up is the Jewish faith used all these books to study the books of the law. because they hold the law in such high regard. Because the books of the law are not just about prohibitions. It's not just about what they couldn't do. It was also about what they were supposed to do and how they were to conduct themselves with God and with society. Because besides, don't do this, don't do that, it told them when you come to worship, to be distinctly different, guess what? You worship this way. When you give a sacrifice, you can't just give any kind of sacrifice. You have to give this in order of a sacrifice. When you eat food, you have to eat certain types of food. When you prepare your food, they prepared it in certain ways. You'll find that when it came to fellow man in certain regards, you're supposed to help out the stranger. You're supposed to show hospitality. If a widow's in need, you're supposed to take care of the widow. So all these things came in place with the laws, and that's why they use all these books to study it, because for them, it was their everything. And today's lesson continues with speaking about the laws, but now it goes into a day in the law that God has set aside for them to honor that day. So our lesson today is entitled Obedience in Rest. Now you talk about a command. I think this should be, or you would think, this is the easiest commandment to follow, right? To take a rest. I don't think you have to tell anybody to take a break. I don't think you have to command them to make them take a break. Because some people stay on a constant break, But here you'll find we're dealing with something a little bit different. It's dealing with a day that has been set apart to be distinctly different here. Now, as that lesson opens up, if anybody's using the Bible, we're coming out of Exodus 31:12. And it says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying." When it says the Lord spake unto Moses, we've used this phrase several times thus far because throughout the writings of the law, you'll see that given. And actually, Moses is the one who's doing the writing. He's writing it in the third person. Moses is writing this for a reason. Throughout history, up to this point, you could say really, they had an oral history, word of mouth. And word of mouth was good with passing things down, but you find word of mouth history just gives you, over time, the foundation. But you find when people tell you this and this one tells you that, over time, things get a little bit off. Things are not quite as accurate as they should be, but you still have the foundation to it. But Moses wanted to write these things down so they could always remember them, because as you see in the lesson, it was supposed to pass from generation to generation and be a perpetual sign unto them, which means this thing is to continue year after year, generation after generation, and they need to remember it. So therefore, write it down to make sure things are accurate. We talked about this here with Brown Grove, that through the years, our history was always oral, wasn't it? This one told this one this one. Mom Francis told this one this thing. This person told Reverend Jackson this one. And they pass it down through the histories. But anytime somebody tells you something, as time goes by, some people would add things, some people would leave things out, that it can be a little off. So that's why with the writings, you'll find they say, let's pin this thing down so everybody has the same understanding of it. It's no more different than when you have a church meeting and they take the minutes, and then they say everybody in agreement with how the minutes were read, and everybody agrees. It then becomes, I call it not the minutes, but it becomes history. Because this is what was said, and everybody knows that this is the way it was supposed to be. So Moses now writes this very important thing down by saying, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak thou also unto the children of Israel." God here speaking to Moses. Moses now writing these things down, and Moses is telling it to who? The children of Israel. The point I want to make here is this, that with the Bible today is open to who? Anybody want to pick it up? You can read the Bible, and prayerfully you have accepted Christ, and that word would also generate with you. So it's written for everybody. But there are times in the Bible where you'll look that the Bible is written at a particular time, to a particular people, for a particular purpose. Here, this message is written at this point, I would say not to the believers throughout the world, but written directly to the children of Israel. So God's not talking at this point to the Gentile nation. He's not talking to the Shiites, the Amorites, the Midianites, and all of them. It says to the children of Israel. Because sometimes, guess what? There's some things that have to be said that is just for who? Just for you. And for you only. Now, sure, by us reading these things, we can learn from it and use it in our life. But at this point, he's talking to the children of Israel. He wants them to have something to know it. Distinctly them at this particular time. Keep that in mind. So it says, Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily, my Sabbath. Let me stop at verily for a moment. Because whenever I see that word verily, one person comes to mind. Anybody know what I'm thinking about? That sits in the Sunday school, or used to be in the Sunday school. can't attend like they want to now? Reverend Jackson, you remember every time verily would come up, he would say, you know, that verily means truth. It means, when you see verily, verily, it means truly, truly. He said it is speaking truth here. And I've always said about, when I look at this from my perspective, I always use it as, this is when you find believers and truthful people, where this saying comes from. Because Christ speaks nothing but truth, correct? And you'll find that we will often say, Wallace will say, let me tell you a true story. And we know that typically it's a true story. I said versus the opposite. When someone comes to you, Lawrence, when they say, hey, man, let me tell you something, this ain't no lie. I don't know about you guys. I immediately go, okay, let me see where this one gonna go. When they start off with, this is not a lie, it makes you kind of wonder what kind of story gonna bring forth. But you'll find here, God always comes forth with nothing but the truth. So here the word says, verily, well, start back from 13, speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily, my Sabbath you shall keep. When you're talking about something, it's always good to what? Know what you're talking about, right? I told you before, one of the instructors on public speaking said there's many things you can use in public speaking. You have orchestration, intonation, pronunciation, and so on from there. He said, but the key thing is you better know what it is you're talking about before you even open your mouth. So when we talk about keep my Sabbaths, we have to understand, what is Sabbaths? What is he speaking of here? He introduces us to, he said, keep my Sabbath, or Sabbath keep. Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep. What is the Sabbath? Seventh day, I hear. Day of rest. Day of rest, okay. You're correct. But one thing to do is always break down the word itself. What does Sabbath mean? You're talking about a sabbatical. Sabbath means to halt. It means to stop. It means to cease. It means to not move. It means to rest. In other words, it means to, some people's favorite word, I'm taking a break. And that's what it is. Basically talks about rest. But when we talk about the Sabbath, what day is the Sabbath? Wait a minute, I hear seventh day, any day, this day, my day, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. What's the Sabbath? Deacon Bush? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. All right, folks. We've heard the input, which is correct. So are we saying there's two Sabbath days? Or is it one Sabbath day? One. Which one? Which day is the Sabbath day? Sunday. And you are correct. Mm. Mm. It can be, or it is, both. See, that's how you talk like a politician. You talk on both sides of your mouth. You follow me? It can be both. But let me tell you why it's both. Some teach that it is both. I think they call it, I get tongue-tied on this word, Sabbath Trinitarianism, or one of those isms. But basically it teaches you celebrate both. Because to go back, the children of Israel celebrated the Sabbath, started on Friday. When the sun goes down for the children of Israel, it starts a new day. So the Sabbath day for them started on a Friday when the sun went down. All day Saturday was considered to be the Sabbath day. Then when the sun went down there, that day ended, and then you have the first day of a new week, which is Sunday, in which we celebrate Sabbath day on Sunday because Christ rose from the graves, New Testament, piece of blood, and so on from there. So we celebrate it on Sunday, which is the first day of the week. Now, some would say, well, are you wrong by celebrating this day? Is this one right or is this one wrong? Basically, you're still giving God the honor. There was many debates even about this. You will find that in Scripture. I'm not going to break down all those because it takes too much time, but back when Paul wrote to Colossians 2:16, if you want to look at that, let me show you about the days. Like I say, God had mandated with his people who were under the law to celebrate it on the seventh day. Was the children of Israel. Because remember we started off with who was he speaking to? The children of Israel. He said this is a sign for you, okay? But we operate under the New Testament of Christ's blood, a new day. But they had these debates going on for the longest. But Paul spoke to the church in dealing with the Sabbath day and how they would argue about it. He says in 2:16 of Colossians, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days. This is all about how the children of Israel tried to make the Gentiles follow all of their laws to be holy. But let me tell you what Christ even said. If you go back to Mark, in Mark's Gospel, 2nd chapter, I'm going to read these words to you. It says here, and the Pharisees said unto him, behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? And he said unto them, have you never read what David did when he had need and was hungered, he and they that were with him? How he went unto the house of God in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat, but for the priests, and gave also to them which were with him. And then Christ says this, and he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. So we were made, or the Sabbath day was made for us. You weren't made for the Sabbath day. Paul talked about why you're arguing about doing this day or doing that day. I'm not going to say it didn't matter, but it's always about you still honor God on one of these days and take a rest from it. So whether you do it on Friday night through Saturday or you do it on Sunday, you're still in line with God because you're still heeding what his commandments have thus said. But you'll find that oftentimes with this, some will get into bitter arguments about the days. And this is what I always show them. When we look in the Bible, they was arguing the same thing we're arguing today, but which day to celebrate. And they said, as long as you only do these things, then you are in compliance. But it says, speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily my Sabbath you shall keep for a sign between me and you throughout your generations. He said, this is for a sign. You know, in the Bible, you'll find whenever Jesus did a miracle, what do they call it? A sign. You find that they don't use the term as we do, miracles. They always say he did this for a sign, and he did a sign. And a sign does what? It's pretty simple. What does a sign do? What's the purpose of a sign? Direct you. And basically it's showing you something. You go to a restaurant, what over the top of the building? There's a sign. You know, you go into an office, there's a sign. On somebody's desk, there's a sign. It's there to show you something. You know, to open your eyes to what's being brought before you. And here you'll find God said, do this as a sign between me and you throughout your generation. God now gives them a sign. It is for them and their generations throughout the years yet to come. And you'll find that with this sign is that it is to basically bring about distinction, to be a little bit different. You see, up to this point, you'll find that all the other nations, all the other countries rather, you'll find that all through the week, they worked. But God had something in place for his people that was different. He said, on this day, you're not going to do anything. And therefore, it would be a sign that people will know that you're my people. Because look how he goes further on and says, the rest of that verse, it says, as I read back through the whole thing, speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily my Sabbath you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that does sanctify you. So God said, I'm giving you a sign that I may sanctify you. Now, sanctify means what? There we go. Set apart, but it's set apart for a holy purpose. Because God designed it all for it to be what? Different. His people are always supposed to stand out from the rest of the world that God may receive the glory. You know, we talk about our folks today. Well, I guess we still do the same thing today. You know, Sunday evening, you didn't cook dinner, right? Well, let's say you haven't cooked dinner this time. But you're going to eat, right? Where are you going to go? To the restaurant. And don't we all window shop? We look at it, we say, here come the church folks. Don't we do that, Wallace? We say, come to church, folks. And how do we know that? We can tell by their appearance, the way they dress, because they are different. It's Sunday. Everybody's now going to the house of the Lord. Out of respect, we dress. We all dress respectful today. It's supposed to be different. Earlier I talked about how in the law, it not only was prohibition what they couldn't do, but what they were supposed to do. Remember, they groomed themselves a certain way. Like you see Orthodox Jews now, you know one a mile away. They have the two little plaits hanging down or had the long beard and so on from there, wear the hats. They're distinctly different. They ate different foods. They prepared a different way. They even worshiped different than everyone else because they stood out. They were sanctified for a holy purpose. So God said, now I'm sanctifying you, that you may stand out, may be a sign to everyone else by what I have done. They know on this day, this must be a child of God, must be of the house of Israel, because they don't work on the Sabbath day. Whereas everyone else, all they think about is commerce and money and so on. But this is to be different. And even today, God called for us to be what? Different. We're supposed to do what? Stand out. People ought to be able to see immediately something about you, whether you have to say something or not. I told you before, this quick testimony, a long time ago, I helped the customer work, did something, and he was getting his car leaving. He said, you a Christian? I said, yes, sir. He said, I thought so, and left. Now, that's not lifting me up. That's giving God glory, but I'm going, I didn't do anything. I just helped him out, was hospitable. Yes, sir, no, sir, and whatnot. The man leaves. But something was done, so it makes you think, how did I stand out from anybody else that he only asked me that particular question? And that's how we are to be, as God people, be distinctly different. God has always called for his people to be different. Oh, but have times changed? Times have changed dramatically. That sometimes you kind of wonder, is this of God or is this not of God? And I would like to say it this way. We as God's people, we know the word does not change, right? God word, what's the saying we use? God word is what? The same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It does not change. But here's the thing. Does time change? Yeah, times does change. So if times change, sometimes you'll find what you used to do back then to reach somebody don't work today, does it? But the word hasn't changed. So what you have to do is you have to change your ways, I call it creative, be inventive, be in certain areas a little open, that you may gain those folks, right? But there's a balance, right? You still have to be distinctly different. You can't just succumb to the ways of the world to try to bring someone in. Because the word says what? For God so loved the world. It said the world there, right? That he sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. But then he goes on to say, for he sent his Son into the world, not to destroy the world, but that the world through him might be saved. So we are placed in the world to go save those that are out in the world, but we ourselves not to be part of the world. So there's a difference. But it's a balancing act. Because oftentimes people think for some reason, I can use the ways of the world, bring them into the church, keep the ways of the world in the church, and they can receive their salvation. By saying that, you're saying the world can save you. But the world can't save you because you don't have a foundation to stand upon. Oh, but if you mix Christ in there and mix it right, guess what? They have a foundation. And before you know it, the ways of the world are pushed aside. But you understand to reach those in the world, you have to go out into the world, but you can't be part of the world. There has to be some distinction. But sometimes, folks, guess what? It's hard to tell. I told you before, I call listening to radio, and I listen to all music, but I like words. No matter what's playing, I listen to the words. Some songs I listen to, I said it before, I said, that's a nice song, it got a nice beat, but that's the nastiest song I've ever heard in my life on the radio, the things they're saying. But it sounds good with the beat and all, but that's worldly music. But a while back, I was driving. I can't remember what the gospel song was, when I was bopping my head to it. But then I noticed, I said, wait a minute. They're mixing in the wobble with the gospel song. They had that go-go beat in the background. It sounded good, but it was to the point that I'm like, wait a minute. Is this gospel? Or is it not? Some might say it is because they hear God's word in it. But it got so much of the world tangled in, you can't tell. It's like Reverend Temple once said, but the little boy fell out the bed and said he hollered out, and mother came and said, what? So what happened? He said, I fell out the bed. She said, well, how'd you fall to the bed? He said, I guess I stayed too close where I got in. So in other words, be careful of how you tied in. But there's supposed to be a difference. William, can you play a tune for me? And I got a question for you guys.
Sit in the chair and I watch TV. You would say that as TV.
Y'all hear that? What was that? That was country music. Play the next one for me, William.
Life is a series of bets. Like challenging this guy.
Just a little exercise. We all know what that is, right?
One look in your eyes, and
Go to the
there
next one, William. Play one more for me. Now listen to those music now. Listen to it. I got a question. Oh yeah. All right, that's good, William. All right. What was the first song? Not the name of it. What type of music was it? Country music. You sure it was country music? You sure it was country music? The next song, what was it? What style of music was that? Well, you give me an author. R&B, okay. The last one was what? Now, how do you know one was country, one was R&B, and one was gospel? You listen. Well, you can listen to all. I can play all the songs back to back, and you listen to it. And you said because of what? Because of sound. Let's try something a little different. The reason why you know what it was, because it was different. Each and every time you hear country music, you know it's what? Country music because of the way it sounds, right? Because it's what? For us, we call it different. Versus country, we play some little R&B. How do you know that's R&B? From country. Well, you grew up on it, but how do you know it's different from country music? Them sound. Okay, and the last one was what? How'd you know it was gospel music? The way it sounds. But in the end, it's all different. And it's made that way to be different so it can stand out. You let you have the Grammy Awards or let's say the Hip Hop Awards and a country guy come out and try to sing. Everybody immediately say, whoa, 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 whoa. He says, a music award, why can't I sing it? Well, because yours is different. And it stands out in that crowd. So the whole point I'm making is that with God, people are supposed to stand out. The minute you heard each song, you knew exactly what it was. You didn't have to think, you didn't have to debate. You knew it was something totally different from what you are accustomed to. And that's how we ought to be in the world. We're accustomed to things in the world, but we're still supposed to what? Stand out and be different. That time it starts, you know exactly, or time you make an action, who you are and what you are about. So God called for people to be different. That's why he says at the very end, I'm going to read back through 13, speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily, my Sabbath you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations. Mainly because of this, that you may know that I am the Lord that doth what? Sanctify you. Which means be what? Set apart for a holy purpose. So God said you have to be distinctly different. So that's why I'm giving you the Sabbath day, that you're different from everybody else. Everybody else is working today, but guess what? You're taking a rest. And there's a reason for why that he does this. But as we go on, he says, and ye shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. The Sabbath day, he says, a holy day. And it's holy unto who? He said you. It is for you. Holy means pretty much the same as sanctified, set apart for a holy purpose, void of evil, void of any sin. He said that you may keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is a holy day unto you. Everyone that defileth it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. You all have come up on the Sabbath day. What's some of the old things you couldn't do on Sundays? We all in your old school. Couldn't shop on Sundays. Don't wash clothes on Sundays. What else went on? I know. I got memories now, Millie. I remember we would come home from church. All of us piled in my grandma's car, and she would come to the road. And if she knew people in these houses, which she typically did, that old Ford Galaxy 500 would go skirt. What's she doing with clothes on the line this time of day? It's Sunday. And sometimes she would go back. Of course, we had to stay in the car and went into the house. But what else we couldn't do on Sundays? Tons of stuff. He made this thing called Blue Laws. Remember that? couldn't sell alcohol. You couldn't sell cars. A lot of businesses couldn't do things. And what was the purpose of blue laws and these things? What was its purpose? That was the whole purpose of it. All these laws and things were put in place to keep the Sabbath, to honor it. Almost to a point, I can see like Constantine, where he mandated everybody to be a Christian, but they basically put laws in place to make sure you honored the Sabbath day. Oh, but slowly those things just went away one by one. Everything starts to go on because they said this is the way of the world. Didn't Bush? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not at all. But you find that there was a time on Sundays. Of course, certain things have to be open. You know, that's a given. You know, that is a given. But typically when Sunday came, you do anything. You couldn't cut your grass. You did not. You were supposed to take a break, take a rest, not do anything at all because of one purpose, to honor the day that God has put into place. And you'll find that, once again, I said it was an easy command. You think everybody would follow it? Even non-believers would follow that one. They take a break. Oh, I can do that and do that easy. But you'll find that God set it aside not as a day just to be, you could say, celebrated, but it was a sacred day. There was a purpose behind why he set this day apart, not only because to distinguish you from everybody else, but it pointed to God and the things he had did in the order of creation, as we're going to slowly get into that. But you'll find it says he won't do any work, therefore, on any day. He says 6 days, verse 15, 6 days, my work, 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is a Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whosoever does any work, and so on from there. Typically, this way, I just went through the previous verse of verse 14, right? And I said, if you shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you, everyone that defileth it shall surely be put to death, for whosoever does any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. And we talked about working and things of that nature. Then I went to verse 15. That is typically how that is taught. Pretty much each and every time I've said it on a session such as this, they talk about you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, the blue laws, and so on. Then they go to verse 15. It's a day of rest and keep on moving. But I'm going, wait a minute, you missed the most important part. God started out by not really explaining the Sabbath. He told you the consequences of defilement, of disrespecting, of disregarding it. But oftentimes you'll find that this is something jumped over because some people consider it to be a hot subject. Some consider it to be debatable. Some don't want to talk about it. They want to sugarcoat it and keep on moving. And I've always been one to say, if you have an instructor or a teacher who does that, be careful what they're teaching, because you can't sugarcoat or mince the words of God. You have to teach it as it is. So here you'll find that here God gives forth first the consequences. Because as we said before, rules without consequences is nothing but good advice, I've always been told. But God starts off now with the consequences for a purpose, to show you how seriously he took this day to be. That this was a day not to be trifled with, not to be played with. In fact, that the reason why it's controversial is that we just read in, what was it, the 7th commandment, I think it was, thou shalt not what? What was that? Thou shalt not do what? Not kill. That would have said, thou shalt not kill. And somebody said, you can sit anywhere, disregard the signs. You'll find that it says, thou shalt not kill. They said, wait a minute, how does loving God bring about death? And the reason why such controversy behind that is that you'll see it at execution, right? You see people hold the signs up. God's word says what? Thou shalt not kill. But here they are killing. That is individuals who I'm going to say do not know God's word. And the reason why I say that is my responsibility, and I would say the pastor's responsibility, is to give you the most accurate information we can relating to the scriptures. And I try to do that each and every week, give you the most accurate information. But there are times where I'll interject my own thoughts on it. But I will let you know that each time. I said, well, this is what I see. But this here is not what I see. This is what God's word says. You'll see folks say you can't do that. That falls in the category of the second table of the laws. And the second table of law deals with what? Your relationship one-on-one with your fellow man. Right? That's what it deals with. So how can here it says thou shalt not kill, but then just past that, God's word says bring about death? Which one is it? Is it one or the other? You have to understand that relationship. One deals with your one relationship with man. So it means thou shalt not kill means you can't kill anybody. You can't murder anyone. But be the powers that be, I would call it just powers, not some angry mobs or something of that nature, but be the powers that be. You see here, not Kenny's word, where God had instituted here capital punishment. Some don't agree with that. But when you look at his scripture, not what I'm saying or any instructor, it said, thou shalt not kill in the second tables of the law, which deals with your one relationship with man in those 6. But then right after he gave those commands, then we have what's known as the 613 Levitical laws, which he brings about certain cases come up, the death penalty could be instituted. So here you see where God basically says these words, and you shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defileth it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. It's not hard to figure out. You need to sit on any theologian to figure out what he's saying here. He said in one breath to man on those foundational building blocks, which are known as the tables of the law, or the testimony that was placed at the Ark of the Covenant. These first 4 commandments deal with your relationship one-on-one with me. The following 6 deal with your relationship one-on-one with your fellow man. And one of those is, thou shalt not kill. Now, as he explains the word even further, and that's why I spoke earlier how the children of Israel had the Torah, they had the Mishnah, they had the Talmud, they had the Gemara to break all these things down. And outside of that first law you heard about thou shalt not kill, there was a series of things that dealt with the death penalty. That not the people put forth, but God put into place. This is not Moses' words. It said the first thing we saw in verse 1 was what? And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying what? So did Moses say these words? Or did God say these words? And that's the thing we have to deal with. There are times in Scripture where everyone wants to see God is only one way, and they want to duck by certain things. But God should know the Sabbath day is to consider to be a sacred day. It is a holy day to uphold. And rules without consequences is no more than good advice. But guess what? If you follow the law, did you have to worry about any penalty? No. Just obey the law and you're fine. I'm not worried about getting a speeding ticket if I'm not going over the limit. So just adhere to his commands, and guess what? There's nothing but blessings behind it. Because God wanted to show that his people had to be what? Distinctly different from everyone else. He said, this day has been set aside that may sanctify you. Because the Sabbath day is a holy day also. But keep in mind, Christ said the Sabbath was made for man. Man was not made for the Sabbath day. Otherwise, you are over that day. Paul said to Colossians, why are you arguing about celebrating this day, and that day, as long as you only honor God on that particular day? But as we go on to finish these things out, it says in verse 16, wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generation for a perpetual covenant. We talked about this. You find there are customs, rituals, and routines that we often carry out. And some customs, they were put in place for a reason, right? And they're good. And they are just, and they should be carried on. Then there are some customs, rituals, routines that times have changed since you first started that. So you need to be modified for one purpose, just to make it better. Then there are some customs, rituals, and routines that need to be just done away with. That's something great-grandma them did for whatever reason. Nobody even knows why. We're even doing it. Just get rid of it. It serves no purpose. But also, God should know there are some covenants that he has that are considered to be a perpetual covenant, which means that it goes on and on and on. Times may change, but what? But his word never changes. He said, you have to always keep this from generation to generation. This is once again one of the reasons why Moses wrote in the third person, and he recorded these things. So they will go from generation to generation to generation. Because oral history by itself was not enough. People lose things through word of mouth. But if they're reading out, here we are 2,000 plus years later, still reading those same words that came out. And he said, this is to be a perpetual thing for your generations to generations. 17 says, is a sign between me and the children of Israel for a little while. Forever. Oh, I got a wrong translation up here. Okay, forever. For 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Now, here you'll find it speaks to another reason why he did that, because 6 days he created the earth. Then the seventh day God rested. Now keep in mind, Sabbath means to halt, to stop, to cease, to rest. But we know God doesn't need any rest. But he said then he was refreshed. The reason why you see that is, not to get too heavy in this one, man has written this, right? And God is a spirit. But man tends to try to put God in a human form. I talk about the breath of God, the arm of God, the heart of God. That's called anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism is when you take human characteristics and apply them to God, or human characteristics and apply them to a deity, such as a ghost that has no arms, feet. But you say, that ghost touched me with his hand. A ghost doesn't have a hand. But we have to speak in language in which we understand. But he talks about these 6 days of work. Here, one guy said, we're supposed to be on that job 6 days a week. That's where you see that at. He said, well, 6 days you had to work and then take a rest. I said, it didn't say 6 days about being on your job every day. Because keep in mind, you can work 2 days a week, but you still work throughout the week. When you go home, guess what you got to do? You got a lawn to cut. You got clothes to wash. You got cars to deal with. You got bad kids you got to tolerate and so on. Go through the whole list. You're always working. But it says, the seventh day, take a break. Just take a rest from it. And also, it was reminded to the children of Israel that at one time they didn't get a break. For 400-something plus years, they was in bondage in slavery. They worked when? Every single day. But now that by the hand of God through Moses, they are now set free, and they get a day where they can take a break. And they deserve this break. But to close it out, it says, and he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communion with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 what? Tables of testimony. That's, my people, is the 10 Commandments. We tend to call them 2 tables of stone, or the 2 tablets. But you find here, you have tables. And some would say that in the movies, you see come down with one big stone. And then he said Moses was angry because people were dancing and defiling God, that he broke it and made 2. You'll see in the Bible, it never says anything about that. It always says he gave him 2 tables of stone. And this is why I'm not going to say we're written that way, 5 on this side and 5 on that side, or 6 on this side and 4 on this side. But they teach you the 2 tables is the first 4 deal with you and God, and the following 6 deal with you and your fellow man in society. Because this is what our theme is, obedience in society. But to close it out, it says, and he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communion with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone, written, once again, in anthropomorphism, with the finger of God. Most would translate that to be written by the power of God. But once again, we try to identify with God as being a spirit. We put him in human characteristics. And that, my people, is our lesson that deals with obedience in rest. Which once again, as I said in the opening, I don't think anybody has to command anybody to take a break. That should be the easiest command to follow. You would think on Sunday when it says take a break, you take a break. It reminds me of, you got this little joke. You remember years ago when I suffered a burn on my leg? Y'all remember that? Well, you know what I remember it very, very, very well. Very well. I don't work for a good while, but I never forget. The doctor told me, say, take it easy. Don't go in the sunlight. You know, he told me, don't do any kind of work. Don't do no sweating. Nothing like that. So I had to go back for the follow-up visit, you know, over and over. And we went back for the last time. And my better part here, the doctor said, well, you been doing what you're supposed to do? She said, Doc, let me tell you something. When you told this man to take a break, oh, he broke. He didn't do nothing. He wouldn't move to do this, wouldn't move to do that. He followed orders. So once again, nobody has to be given a command, you would think, to take a break. But with God, this is more than taking a day of rest. It's giving him the honor for all the blessings he has placed upon you, that now you can just rest and relax for all the blessings he has given you. Now, next big lesson, your homework, is, of course, is to read on. This time we're coming out of Leviticus, which means the law of the priests or the words of the priests. Coming out of Leviticus 19, starting at verse 9, it deals with obedience among neighbors. So once again, how you treat your fellow man. The things that you are supposed to do to treat your fellow man that are written out, guess what, in the law. To close it out, the law is not just about here what you can't do. It's all about also how you're supposed to treat your fellow man and what you are supposed to do. So with those words being said, we'll close this session out as we go into the worship service. So at this hour, we ask everybody to rise to their feet. Deacon Bush, give us a closing word of prayer to bring us into our worship service.